Good evening, everyone, and thank you, President. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Rajan Saxena, who is an erudite person and absolutely perfect one to speak on today's topic. Dr. Rajan Saxena is an institution builder, marketing academic, and an author in marketing, corporate strategy, institution building, and leadership. He held the position of Vice Chancellor of NMIMS University in Mumbai from 2009 to 2020. Prior to this position, he held position of Director, IIM Indore, IBS Gurgaon, and SP Jain Institute of Management Studies and Research. He is a graduate of Sri Ram College of Commerce and PhD from Delhi School of Economics. Dr. Saxena started his career in academics at Delhi University and later taught at XLRI Jamshedpur, IIM Kolkata, SPJIMR Mumbai, NMIMS, IIM Indore, University of Calgary, Canada, and Pace University in New York. Dr. Saxena has also published over 80 articles and 24 cases in national and international journals and 2 books on marketing management. 6th edition is right now presently running, and international marketing published by McGraw-Hill. Dr. Saxena has advised leading Indian and multinational companies in areas of branding, marketing strategy, and organization structure and leadership. Some of the companies with whom he was associated are Parley Exports, brands like Thumbs Up, Gold Spot, Limca, and Mazda, Bajaj Electricals, HDFC, BACS, now Adani, Istat, Jindal Iron and Steel, RCF, Hext, Agrevo, etc. He has trained over 20,000 executives in India, Sri Lanka, and Cameroon. A stupendous, I think, number. Dr. Saxena was president of ISTD and held leadership positions in management education and higher education in AMBISA, AIMS, AIMA, and FICCI, and was conferred awards for institution building, leadership, teaching excellence, and as distinguished alumnus. One of his most recent award was AIMA's Keval Noria Award for Academic Leadership in Management Education. He is and has been on the boards of several public and private sector companies. He was conferred fellowship by ISTD, IMCI, that is Institute of Management Consulting in India. He has co-founded with other educators and industry professionals the Open Ed Works, which is a consulting, training, research, and network organization. The Open Ed Work goal is to assist transformation in organizations, especially educational institutions. I am sure he is absolutely the perfect person to address us today on the education policy, which is going to come into force very soon. And I hope it meets with grand success with people like Rajan Saxena. And of course, if we remember, was Dr. Vasudha Kamath at the helm of the affairs. Thank you, Dr. Rajan Saxena, for accepting. And my dear friends, may I present Rajan Saxena to you. Dr. Rajan Saxena, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kavitaji. And I'm indeed honored today to be speaking at my own club. In fact, when I was asked by the program committee chair, Shadul, to speak in the club on a subject like NEP, my first question was that why me? I'm a member of the club. I'm very much like you all. Why should I be speaking? Why don't I suggest to you some more people who can really do a better job than me? But then I think he prevailed on me largely because of the fact that he said that, well, this is a time when we all need to understand where education is headed to, and therefore what is it that we all need to be knowing about. That really took me on, and I said that let me now talk about it. I have also been very much interested in the developments that have been taking place in education in the recent past. We are all familiar with the fact that with the kind of academic losses and the learning losses that have happened post-COVID and lockdown that was over here. We are still going through the similar kind of process, and the schools and colleges have yet to reopen. The last data that I saw that emerged from UNESCO and from some of the other international agencies and even the national agencies talked about almost about 253 million students who have today dropped out from schools. Of them, almost about 6 to 7 million are the ones who have completely gone out of the school system itself. Also, what the data is today indicating that the biggest crisis today that is there, and this is an emergency today in education, is the fact that students don't know their own language. Students can't even count. Students can't even add or subtract. So the numerical literacy today is a very big kind of a problem, and also the communication skills are today one of the biggest problems in this country itself. At the same time, if I were to look at some of the more recent other kind of data that is there, it talks about something much more, I would say, a matter of concern, that though we have invested significantly in higher education from where I come in the last 10 years, and there's been a substantive growth, and I would talk about it just in a minute's time. Interestingly, the employability of the graduates coming out from the universities is really extremely low. Almost about 85% of engineers today are unemployable. They cannot be employed by, and they don't have the skills to be employed in the industry itself. There's largely because of the fact that the engineering colleges are still focused on what they were doing 20 years ago, when, let us say, that there has been a complete change in the industry itself, largely because of the, let's say, the technology, and also the fact that we are living today in an era of what we call it as the Industry 4.0 and a knowledge society, which requires a much greater degree of an understanding of not just digital skills, or not only having a digital skills, but at the same time, be able to apply those digital skills in the various areas where they're really going to be operating in, whether this is in the area of mechanical engineering and therefore getting into an automobile industry, for example, or it is in the area of electronic industry, or it is in the area of consumer durables, or it is in the area of industrial products, name them. The fact is that the workplace has changed, the jobs have changed, the profiles are very different, the skill sets are very different, yet we continue to graduate students with skill sets that were perhaps good and relevant maybe in early years of the 21st century, but certainly not anymore now. So I really now, and do I have the sharing rights? So I would like to now start off with the fact that, well, today the time when we need to rethink on education. We need to relook at what is it that we need to be doing in education. I'm also of a firm belief that if economy has to be rebuilt post-COVID, then investment in education, science, and technology and research are the prerequisites to that. It just cannot be just simply by giving some financial stimulus to the industry that there can be a kind of a turnaround, or let's say the recovery of the nation itself. So this is something which I have had a very firm conviction, and I've been talking about it. And therefore, largely because of the fact that we all are aware of the fact that perhaps the most powerful weapon which one can use to change the world is education. Now, if that is so, then the question that invariably comes back to me, and we are familiar with the fact that, and as Upanishad said, that it talks about the tamso ma jyotirmaya, that is in terms of banishing the darkness of ignorance and taking me from the darkness to the era of light and a greater degree of awareness, the knowledge part of it that we are talking about. Knowing all this, the fact is that, and this is where I put the next question to all of us. Where did we go wrong, I think, in the last 3 decades? This was a question that, while when the policy was getting framed, Dr. Kasturi Rangan and some of the other members were in Mumbai, and they had a meeting with some of us, not only in Mumbai, but also in Delhi with the FICCI kind of representatives from Higher Education Committee. So the perspective was that somewhere or the other in the last 3 decades, we have gone wrong. Though we have focused on the growth in education, we have focused on, let's say, providing education to a growing population in India, and the focus had been on technical education in a very big way. So therefore, we have had a very large engineers pool itself that has come out, and these engineers have really brought us great degree of pride to the nation. But and obviously getting into management education and architecture education, other kinds of courses that were there. But somewhere we lost out. And what is it that we lost out? Other disciplines really make an individual, which really make an individual, we really missed out. These disciplines, like for example, humanities, social sciences, which are so very vital to the development of an individual, but just simply missed out. The University Grants Commission stopped giving grants to some of these departments, and many of these schools and colleges and the universities have had faculty in these disciplines which were declared as surplus itself. A serious crisis, I would say, brewed in education. We were developing graduates who were engineers, who were managers, but they were missionaries. They were heartless people. They did not have the social skills. They did not have the required problem-solving skills. They did not have the understanding of the society the way they should if the problems have got to be resolved. They did not have an interdisciplinary approach. They did not look at the full picture that was there. Invariably, if there was a problem, it was looked at it from a very, very narrow perspective. So what was happening? We were solving a problem, but creating multiple other problems, and from that particular solution itself, because there was no holistic understanding. So we went wrong somewhere in the last 3 decades in our education planning. And if you look at it in the last 3 decades, and this was a question that I asked, and I had been talking about it extensively. Why is it that we have been losing out to our neighbors in Asia and Australia, despite the fact that we have had an expansion in education in the last 3 decades or so? Look at where was Singapore, where was Hong Kong, where was Malaysia, where was, let's say, even in the Middle East, the UAE itself, the Dubai itself, or let's say some of the other countries, Indonesia, for example, Brazil, as an example. Many of these countries were nowhere on the education map in 1990. But in the last 3 decades, they simply climbed up. And why? Because of perhaps the policies. There were policies that we talked about it, and we will talk about it just in a minute's time. We've had a regulator who has had an assumption that every private sector institution, though accounting for 75% of the additional new investment in education and 65% of all enrollments in education, in higher education in this country, and more when we talk about it in the school education, they perhaps play a much bigger role than what I've just talked about it in the context of higher education. The feeling in the government is that all private sector institutions and owners, they are perhaps not honest people. There's a trust deficit that exists between the private sector, institutions and the owners, and the government. Institution freedom over time period has been compromised by politicians, bureaucrats who have rampaged the institution autonomy. In the name of participation in the vice chancellor selection, for example, it is not uncommon to see the political forces driving the vice chancellor selection, or the director of an IIM, or the director of an IIT driving those kinds of selections itself. So there is a kind of what I felt is that the autonomy of the institution got compromised. There'd been an exploitative behavior, both by the institution and the government, and perhaps the education system had been rigid, it had been input driven, and it has been low in quality. Not surprisingly, we today have an education emergency in this country. But yet, when I start looking at it a little bit more closely, I realized that, well, Indian education story is a story of contrast and contradiction. If I were to just look at higher education from where I come, our gross enrollment ratio, which was about 24.2%, which is the total number of students who have come into the universities, and as opposed to the number of students who have been left out, has grown from 24.2 to about 26.3% by 2018 and 19. And as per the latest data, it is about 27%. This is aimed, the target is to increase it to 50% by 2050 or 2035. 2035 is what the policy is saying. But obviously, this will now need to be tempered with, given the fact that there have been a last 2 years have been virtually a year that have been a washout in education itself. We also realize that there has been a growth in education system itself, growth in institutions itself. The number of universities, for example, grew from 281 in 1990 or 2001 to about 1,000 in 2018-19. The colleges, the number of colleges grew from 11,000 in the same period to about 40,000. So there has been a fragmentation. There's been a fragmentation of education in this country. And when there has been a fragmentation, the quality has been seriously compromised. And at the same time, we do realize that there have also been some of the other serious concerns that have now come up in education. Though we grew, in the last 5 years, almost 6 lakh engineering seats have been scrapped because there have been fewer students who have been seeking admission. And why is it so? Because of poor infrastructure, because of poor quality of faculty, because of irrelevant curriculum, because of the job market not being what it was, the kind of volatility in the job market. The digital skills, which are now becoming important, particularly the artificial intelligence, data sciences, Internet of Things, machine learning, and so on, those things that were becoming more important. Then let us say the mechanical engineering and computer science, or for that matter, let's say even the civil engineering and electronics, some of those areas that were very, very popular at one stage. Today we find that there are much less takers. Almost every year, 200 to 300 colleges, engineering colleges are getting closed, and almost similar number in management are getting closed. There's another aspect that we realize also. And why is it so? As I said right in the beginning, over 80% of Indian engineers, or almost now 85% of the Indian engineers, are not fit for any job in the knowledge economy. MBA graduates, only 54% of the students are employable. And so no wonder if, let us say, the student is paying about, let's say, 6 lakhs or 7 lakhs by way of acquiring an MBA degree, and gets a job at the end of it, of which gets him about 3 lakhs or 3.5 lakhs or 4 lakhs, it's a poor value for money. And not only so, of the batch where he is graduating from, and this I'm talking about it, not the top tier institutions which have, but I'm talking about tier 2, tier 3 level of institutions, you find that the number of students that are being taken simply goes away. Interestingly, you may want to know that mass recruiters who were there with us, like Infosys, ICICI, are no more there. Why? Because the kind of skill sets that they were looking at, the kind of job losses within their own organization, particularly at the lower end, was substantive. Technology has replaced some of those kind of jobs. People who went in as software engineers in Infosys, for example, which would come, I remember, at NMIMS and would want to recruit the entire batch of engineers. In 2017, they said we are going to be taking only about 10 students. Imagine that kind of a drop which was there. So this is something which is a growing concern. MBA, as I said, 54%. Of the B.Pharm, Polytechnic, BCom, and other kind of areas, it's only 15%. So the employability keeps going down. The one conclusion was that while professional education would somehow or the other get you some job, in the case of humanities and social sciences, if you are graduating, there is no job. The bigger question that has come up. What is the value of the university degree in today's time? Is really this kind of a degree really relevant to me? And what of this? And when let's say the skills are more important than the degree, should I really go and join the university? Well, it does give you a lot of benefits. It's not to say that the university doesn't provide you with that kind of benefit, but perhaps the employer sees more value today in the skills rather than in those kind of non-skill, but intangible kind of value propositions that a college or a degree really gives across. So let's go to the other part. But what happens to the school education is happening there? Look at the kind of enrollment figures that go down. Between 6th to 8th, there's almost about 91% of the students are there. But as you go up from 6th to 8th to 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th, it starts dropping down to the last point where 56 point, almost in 11th and 12th, it's almost about 57%, which is there. And the numbers who continue in school education. Today what we find, as I said, there were almost about 30 million people who are the school dropouts. So what are the challenges that lie ahead? And why I'm building it up is because this is where now the new education policy will start looking at it. What are the challenges that are there today in education? One is obviously the access. Today, because the number of colleges, because the colleges and universities or schools are concentrated more in metro areas and in larger cities, in the rural areas or in smaller towns, this is becoming a problem. Getting good quality education. So therefore, access, quality, and equity. That is, in other words, all sections of the people, irrespective of their gender, income, racial background, or let's say the social background, etc. They should be able to, they're not able to really get there. There's discrimination. Another challenge is that of how do I make education more affordable, especially when it comes to private sector education. There's also a challenge which lies in terms of getting the right set of faculty, right type of faculty. Faculty numbers are there, faculty would be available. But then the competent faculty is just the missing today in whether this is a school or it is in higher education. And obviously looking at it from the perspective of excellence. So it is from this kind of a perspective that Kasturi Rangan Committee came up with the National Education Policy, which was announced by the Government of India in 2020, last year. It's a voluminous document, let me tell you. It's extremely hard to be able to condense or to bring out the essence of it. in such a short time period. But let me say that this has been one of the most comprehensive education policy, which talks about it right from the preschool, which includes preschool education and goes up to higher education. It refers to teacher education. It refers to languages. It talks about languages. How do you promote languages? It talks about technology in education. It refers to a regulatory framework, which is more based on trust and outcome-driven education. It's a very, very comprehensive. And in the last year, when we had Dr. Kasturi Rangan on our platform at the TOE, it took him almost about a year, 1.5 hours, to really talk about what went in to making of this particular policy itself. So imagine the man who was himself chairing that committee talking about it. I have very little kind of a role in it. Visionary. The policy is very visionary. It is first time, as I said, it is integrating preschool, primary, middle, and secondary school education with the higher education for the very first time in education in this country. Otherwise, everything has been, in the silos, and there's been no kind of a unification. There's never been an integration which has been there. They've been focused on 21st century skills itself. It focuses on 21st century skills, digital skills, for example. It focuses on learning effectiveness, very important, learning effectiveness, not just merely education. One thing which is there is, as Socrates said once, is that, well, education is not about filling a vessel. It is about igniting a flame. And how does that happen? Only when, you don't really go on towards building up only cognitive part of it. You don't keep on giving the inputs without really understanding whether this is making an impact or not on the development of the student, and the student is able to apply there or not. Learner and teacher focuses their vocational skills for the first time are being talked about in education, and they get as much importance in the education policy as the higher order skills, including the professional skills itself. So the vision of the new education policy is that they want to build up an education which is rooted in Indian ethos, that will contribute to the transformation of India into and make it more sustainable, equitable, and vibrant knowledge society. It is directed at developing learners who have deep-rooted pride in being Indian, not only in their thought, but also in spirit, intellect, and deeds. There's also to develop knowledge, skills, values, and disposition that support responsible commitment to human rights, sustainable development and living, and global well-being, thereby reflecting a truly global citizen. Friends, what is said is pride in being Indian and yet being truly a global citizen. That is the crux of the vision itself that is there. So what were some of the systemic changes that have been talked about? The most important change at the school level is to move away from 10+2, that is 12 years at the school, to 16 years of education system. In effect, it integrates the preschool also. So preschool is really your first 2 years, and the next 3 years, the first 5 years of which has been broken, first 2 years is the preschool through Anganwadis, through preparatory schools, through any other forms of the schools that are there. The first 2 years is truly speaking the foundational school. It's a foundation. It's where the foundations are laid in the child. And then the next 3 years are really your primary, the pre-primary itself, how you are really moving up the child from first to the third itself. And the next 3 years is the primary area, third, the fourth, fifth, and the sixth, or the third, fourth, and the fifth. And then we are talking about the next 3 years, which is the sixth, seventh, and eighth, and then it is the 9th, 10th, and 11th, and 12th. So we are really talking about it from the perspective of taking in 16 years, which is in line with the international kind of an education system coming in India at the school level itself. It is the first, as I said, to include the preschool education. 3 to 5 years, that is the most critical. 85% as educators tell us, as psychologists tell us, child psychologists tell us, 85% of cumulative brain development occurs prior to the age of 6. And therefore, the early child care education is extremely important. And for the first time, it is referring to how the teachers need to be developed. And not only teachers, but even parents need to really understand the importance of the early child care education itself. This ECCE, as it has been said, is flexible, it is multifaceted, it is multi-level, play-based, activity-based, and in inquiry-based. Look at some of those kind of skill sets, the emotional skill, the kind of skills that you are building up, the kind of motor skills that you are developing, the child's thinking abilities that you are developing, your creativity that you are really talking about it. Experiential learning is where we are really getting it, right at the pre-primary level itself. The biggest priority that it is laid down for the government is to achieve a universal foundational literacy and numeracy kind of a literacy itself in primary school by 2025. Well, obviously this will get tempered with the. So foundational literacy and numeracy is as important as any other literacy campaign that the government of India is really running. It is incomplete if this kind of a foundational literacy is not there, which is in terms of the language, it is in terms of, let us say, your communication, it is in the area of numeracy itself, the numerical part. The focus of the state, therefore the focus of the government of India, that it says, is to go from the current level of the enrollments in school education to 100%, bring the school children back to the schools. And how do they do that? Through good quality infrastructure and teachers. Friends, I just was looking at it, this school dropout in the COVID, what has that led to? Look at that. It has led to children going without meals. Particularly, I'm talking about it at the lower level of the income strata, lower levels of the society itself. Children going without meal because midday meal is just not there. Children going back to work, child labor has increased. Early child marriages have increased. Child exploitation has increased. These are some of the kind of conclusions that have come up from various kinds of researches that have been conducted by UNICEF and by UNESCO and many other kind of places. So it is necessary to bring these children back to school. And how do you do that? Improve the infrastructure in the first place. School education in rural areas is so missing, and particularly when I look at some of the states which are right at the bottom of the economic development, like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and some of those states that are there, where the Madhya Pradesh, for example, where I've personally seen that there is a teacher, there's a children, but no school, no infrastructure. There's a teacher, no children, no teacher. These are some of the kind of things that we need to be taken care of. And that's where it says, please focus on good quality infrastructure, teachers, so that children feel motivated. When the children don't feel motivated to come to the school, they're going to drop out. There's simply no doubt about it. And vocational skills have got to be developed right there itself, right from the school, by doing things. For example, learning pottery, for example. Go to the potter. Sit down on the potter wheel. See how the pot is really made. You learn gardening. You learn carpentry. You learn many of those kinds of areas, which really excites the student of doing things. Sports, for example, is in a similar way. But at the same time, do not forget that the world is today driven by the digital technology. So as you go up in your school ladder, they talk about it from the perspective of the artificial intelligence, machine learning, design thinking. Get an understanding of all this that is there, global citizenship, environmental education, etc. So therefore, it is about bringing fun in education at the school level. That's what it says. It says bring fun in learning, make education multilingual, Don't just merely give it in education or only in Marathi or in Gujarati or in Hindi. Though mother tongue has to be critical. Your own language is critical. That's one thing which you should be doing. And that's where the policy says 3-language formula must continue. It is also talking about multidisciplinarity that is there. So obviously, it says that as you come into the 9th, 10th, and 11th and 12th, you may be doing science, but don't forget that you have also to do something in the area of humanities and social sciences. You may be doing something in the area of humanities and social sciences, but you just cannot get away without understanding the mathematics, or for that matter, let's say, understanding, let's say, physics itself. And some of the areas that have today grown, for example, of an interest, where the children are getting interested, is more like, for example, the astrophysics, for example. This is something which is of an interesting area that is coming up. Flexibility. And flexibility, and along with it is the fluidity, which is there. The children must be allowed to really, move from one discipline to another, from one subject to another, to really learn something which is there. These like that, reforms. You must have seen just this year, CBFE made a very significant kind of a reform by saying that we were not going to be conducting the 12th exam, but we're going to be taking the continuous assessment of the child that the school would have made right from the 9th to the 12th itself, by giving different weightages to, let us say, the more weightage to the 12th and lesser weightages coming down to the 9th itself. Now, the schools were unprepared for that. The IB schools were, but the CBSE schools were unprepared. So therefore, you would have seen that at suddenly there has been a shoot up. There's been a spurt in the marks of the students who have come out from this high school or from their 12th exam. But this is where the reforms are really needed. So that one should know, the student should know that my future is not going to be decided only by the 12th marks. So I'm not going to be running to the tuition classes. I'm not going to be, right from the 9th or 9th from the 10th. I'm running to the tuition classes. As a parent, I'm concerned. As when my children were growing, I would see that really happen, and I would always say, why? And that is where we are really concerned. Vocational, obviously, online courses. Therefore, at the school level, they're talking about vocational online courses need to be bringing in. Therefore, online education and the skill education is going to be there, and students should be able to exercise this choice. Obviously, empowerment happens only when they have the freedom of choice. And there's been a complete input to outcome-driven education, school examination after the primary, middle, and that's where it is. So after the 3rd standard, that's the pre-primary, 5th primary, and the 8th. So that is where not really the kind of and that too, they're looking at it, a continuous evaluation process coming in. Let me go back. Let me now come to the higher education, which is where I come into. Our biggest problem has that been of a rigid education. So what we are talking about reforms, that there is flexibility, choice-based education. For this purposes, there are a couple of things that the policy has talked about. Fortunately, all these have been acted upon by the government at this point in time. By, let's say, an academic bank of credits, for example, it has already talked about it from the perspective of multiple entry and exit options that has already been come up. That the student can really go out after 6 months or after 1 year with a diploma or a certificate or whatever that may be, may again come back and then join from where he left. Credit portability. I can carry my credits from one institution to another institution. Innovation have been given the premium, not really compliance. Earlier, compliance was more important. The curriculum that AICTE have developed, I need to comply with that. No, it says now innovations. Credit for field learning. Until yesterday, I remember an incident when a student came to me that he had created a robot which would go right to the source of the fire and extinguish the fire, which was being tested by the Bombay Fire Brigade. But and he said that, well, I have not been able to attend the college, in engineering classes, etc. So I wanted, can anything be done? I said, my dear boy, I would want to do something for you, but yet the structure in which I'm living today, it does not allow me to do it. Now, the same child, if he were to come, can really get this kind of a credit. Programs, therefore, have to be customized to student needs. So the student now becomes the focus point. There, you can really create those kinds of programs that are customized to the student needs. 3 to 4 year option at the undergraduate level, postgraduate level, again 1 to 2 years, depending on what you want to do. Integrated programs is the focus of the new education policy, and most importantly, liberal education. It is a big chapter has come up on liberal education in the new education policy. And it talks about the liberal arts, talks about the need to develop a holistic individual because if you want to develop global citizens, you need to have people with liberal mind, critical thinking, and experimentation, and be willing to really experiment. They must be able to accept the diversity as a way of life. It talks about 3 categories of institutions: research institutions like the Indian Institute of Science, or the National Institute, or the IISER, or let us say the ISI, Indian Statistical Institute. Teaching institutions, which are not just merely teaching, but also the research institutions of the kind, let us say NMIMS, or SP Jain in Mumbai, or let's say Somaya, and the large number of them are over there, and autonomous colleges. It is talked about consolidation. It is said that, well, from 40,000 colleges, it must come down to about 20,000 colleges or 10,000 colleges. And how does that happen? Through autonomous colleges, degree granting colleges, which is what they're saying, through cluster universities, through other kinds of formats that they have talked about it. Then finally, they say that today we have 3 categories of institutions: government, private, and deemed. So they say there will be no deemed university. All deemed universities will be converted into private universities. It says that no more affiliations. Affiliation have been the biggest bane of Indian higher education system. The 2 biggest institutions in India, in Maharashtra, are Mumbai and Pune, which have the largest number of colleges that are affiliated to it. And obviously, you cannot ensure quality there. It says, get away from affiliation, push for autonomous colleges, degree granting colleges. And it is also talked about withdrawing all government nominees from institutional boards, finance committee, etc., and letting the boards decide on the future vice chancellor, the future directors, etc., etc. It talks about it from the perspective of the multidisciplinary education, largely because of the fact that knowledge today lies at the intersection of the disciplines. It doesn't lie only in the 4 walls of the discipline itself. It lies when you start understanding the discipline in a larger context itself, and when there is an intersection which is there. Complex problem solving today requires holistic understanding of the problem itself, which is one of the biggest skills that is going to be required. And therefore, it talks about development of the multidisciplinary institutions in India. So standalone institutions like IIM, for example, or IIT have already started moving in this kind of a direction of bringing in other disciplines within their own area itself. Skilling is the next big area. And therefore, as I've been saying, it focuses on conceptual technology skills. At the same time, it is referring to the value-based education. Unfortunately, over a period of time, we have forgotten to talk about values in our and providing those values to our students itself. As a consequence of which, we today have a more dishonest society rather than being an ethical society itself. Environment, the value of environment, the value of organic living, the value of good health, and accepting the fact that we have constitutional rights and constitutional obligations. So it is not just merely rights, but also the obligations that we have. And we must also talk about global citizenship, which is there, which is in terms of the understanding that the global diversity itself. And finally, it talks about it from the perspective of internationalization. For the first time, it says that India should be promoted as a global study destination and bringing the foreign students to India, much the same way as we had been doing earlier too. And the biggest kind of a value proposition is premium education at affordable costs. That is it. And this compares very well. If we are able to do it, we would be able to really get much more number of students. And I've been seeing this kind of a growth of some of the numbers of private of foreign students in Indian universities, particularly in the courses like business, technology, and sports, for example. They've been growing in a big way. Indian universities, they've been allowed to set up campuses in other countries. And these are generally now, right now, the category 1 universities or the institutions of deemed eminent or institutions of eminence that will be allowed to be setting up the campuses outside. Top 100 foreign universities are likely to operate in India. And most importantly, that the credit that the student may earn in any of the foreign universities, they will be permitted to be carried forward to the Indian higher education institution for the award of a degree. This is what took us in NMIMS to come up with a dual degree program of MBA from NMIMS and MS in Decision Sciences from Purdue University. In this case, this was a typical example of core credit portability which was there. And finally, let me sum up that education is all about individual empowerment. It is about freedom of choice that must exist in democratic societies. And therefore, we need to invest in education. Government needs to invest in education. Government cannot go away from education. It just cannot leave the education to the private sector only. As I said right in the beginning, Socrates said that education is the kindling of the flame and not really filling the vessel. This is what new education policy or national education policy attempts to do. And it is from this kind of a perspective that I believe that it is truly speaking disruptive and truly speaking transformative in nature itself. And if the policy is implemented in spirit and in letter, the way the policy is, I have no hesitation in my mind, and I have no doubt in my mind that in next 15 to 20 years, India will truly be a global hub of good quality education at an affordable price. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'm open for the questions that are there.
Fabulous, fabulous. The first question we have is that which skill is in massive shortage globally, and can India fill in this gap?
Well, there are a couple of skills that are really in shortage at a global level. One is obviously, as I said, the digital skill itself is today big much. That there's a lot of crisis there. The other is in terms of the people skills. We have engineers who have good technical skills, good computer engineers, but they don't have the people skills. Biggest problem that is there is really dealing with people itself. So people skills. The other part of it is the emotional intelligence that we are talking about, arising out of that. And therefore, the whole lot of a development of the emotional intelligence, and therefore the courses that come up from there. The next one is in the area of complex problems, as I just referred in my part. These are some of the skills that have been referred to. Other part of it is the critical thinking. Unfortunately, most of education is rote learning. We don't emphasize on this whole part of a reflection, this whole part of analyzing why it is being said. Reflection, contemplation, they are so important for the purposes of, operating or functioning in the world itself. If that doesn't happen, critical thinking doesn't happen, the logical thinking cannot never get there. And if that gets compromised, and this is where it has happened, no wonder then the employment or employability figures of our graduates really decline.
Okay. I have a question actually. If you talked about getting foreign universities here, which is, of course, I think a very interesting thought. But my question is, who will be deciding the curriculum? Because what you put in the curriculum essentially molds mind. I mean, especially about the history and our perspectives. So who will be molding the curriculum? If we get foreign university?
Gautam, this is where, if you look at what I said right in the beginning. Earlier, this is one kind of a big kind of a change in this education policy. Earlier, it was the AICTE, which would, or let's say some of these other regulators, who would lay out the curriculum. For example, the Council of Architecture would tell me, this is what you need to be doing. The Pharmacy Council would tell me that this is what the way pharmacy education should be. The shift is now goes from regulator to the institution. When we talk about institutional autonomy, when we talk about academic autonomy, this starts from here itself. Can I bring in innovation in my education? If the world is moving at such a fast pace, how do I continue to really teach what a regulator may have said to me about 5 years ago? Because the regulator is not going to be changing every now and then, but I'm going to be changing because I'm knowing about it. So it goes back to the institution. So even if foreign universities are there, they bring in their own curriculum. But even that curriculum would be in line with what the global industry is looking for. One of the biggest benefit of a foreign university coming in is in the area of what we call it a good quality faculty, research capabilities, and the third is what I call it as the infrastructure, the kind of level of infrastructure that needs to be developed. Not really some of those kind of fanciful, but the learning infrastructure that is truly required. The whole physical environment must encourage that kind of a learning environment itself. That is something which, to my mind, would be then good quality. Going to be bringing some great processes, great systems from where Indian education system can really only benefit. I see one Anand Bhai.
I think people can.
May I ask a question?
Right.
Mohan Bhai is asking some question, I think. Mohan Bhai.
I think Anandji had his hand up. So
Yeah. Anand, you can unmute yourself, I believe.
Can I ask the question?
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Sir, as you know, 55% of population is busy in farming. 10% population is one or other way depend on construction. But both the sectors are full of unskilled labor. Any provision to skill them in this new education policy?
Well, Anandji, the national education policy is not really referring to specifics like agriculture or let us say the civil engineering area, the construction part of it, construction part. It leaves it to the sectors itself to really look at it, but it puts down the foundation as to what is it that should be there. The most important part of it, for example, is the doing part. If the students don't really understand how to do a certain thing, for example, if you are in a construction industry, as an example, I'll give you just one thought itself. If you cannot, let us say, read a drawing that has been given to you by the architect, if you cannot really read that, if you cannot really then accordingly plan the kind of a construction part of it itself, you'll never be able to do. Or if you don't understand, for example, how to assess the strength of a material, for example, in a civil engineering, how do you really work? Or if you haven't really stood on a construction site and understood, for example, the foundation, why, for example, different soils have different kinds of requirements when it comes to laying down the foundation, you just can't. And this is the irony of in civil engineering courses today in India. This is the irony of mechanical engineering courses in India. This is an irony of most of the other sectors where we find, and there is no, and that is now got reflected in the employability of the statutes. So far as agriculture is concerned, for example, one of the biggest kind of a thing, take an example like in Western UP, and this is not today's kind of a data that is there. A lot of rich farmers earlier sent out their children for education. When they came back, they had really gone into agriculture back. They had acquired new skills over there, maybe in the area of sericulture, for example, or let us say making of the seeds, for example, or talking about organic farming, for example, or talking about, let us say, the fruits itself, or let's say the green farming itself. So they really picked up some of those kinds of skills. And if you go to, let us say, Tarai belt in Uttarakhand, for example, or in UP, you find some of these kinds of large farms which have all the four kind of crops. It's not just merely the Rabi and let us say the Kharif that they talk about, but it is all the four that is there. So the importance is in terms of, and that is where in agriculture education, for example, today, what has now become important is not just merely the agriculture science, but it is as much agriculture technology and it is agriculture management, or let's say and in the management, more specifically getting into the area of how do you add value to your product, how do you add more value, or how do you really relate to the whole ecosystem itself, how do you become a part of that ecosystem? And that is where let's say, when we created a school of agriculture at Shirpur, for example, that was almost about in 2018. This was a thought process that was there in that school of agriculture.
Thank
May
you,
I
sir.
ask a question?
Yes, sir.
See, historically speaking, I believe major mistakes happened for India when government stayed back in business and moved out of education and health. And secondly, when they decided to privatize the education, instead of inviting reputed foreign universities to start educational campi here, they allowed politicians to grab land and start their business of milking public, which affected the quality of education at the cost of public, enriching the politicians only. This because say when I was at IIT, my annual tuition fees were 200 rupees a year, but government spent on each student even in 70s was about 16 to 20,000 rupees per year per student. And in most areas, including primary education, this thing government spending did not keep pace or reduced considerably, which affected the quality of education. I do hope that the government implements this policy as it is envisaged, because politicians don't like to lose control. So although the provision may be that the board and the VCs will not be elected by the politicians, the pressure will start building up. If the school going children, the pass percentage is low, the public will put pressure on politicians and they will say dilute the standards. So I hope that doesn't happen. And I would like to have your comments on this.
I quite agree to large part of what you have said. Government should not go out of education. This is for sure. Because education is not a private good. It's not a private good. I have often said, it's a private capital. In the case of the private sector, I have often said, it's a private capital for public good that is there. As long as one understands that this is a private capital that is coming in for a public good, education grows. For example, take a look at it in SVKM also, or for that matter, let us say many of the trusts in the city itself. Bharti Vidya Bhavan, or many of these others, that really came up in an extensively in a very big way. And new generation universities, for example, Ashoka, for example, Ashoka Foundation, for example, private money, but for a public good. Is it that the education is cheap there? No, education is not cheap. But everything that is being generated is getting plowed back into education, in improving the quality of education, in remaining relevant. Shiv Nadar, for example, the same story. Munja, the same story. Jindal, though politician there, Naveen Jindal and his father, Upi Jindal and others, they were there. Yet, Jindal University today is one of the first global university which is started as a law institution and one of the best law school in the private sector. So when I talk about it, it's not just, we try to sort of brush all private sector. No, I don't want to do it. But the same way that we want to paint the public system in let's say everything white. It's not that. Public system has the same flaws as that of the private sector. It is as exploitative as the private sector is. Certainly.
Mohan Bhai wants to talk.
Yeah, I'll just take. Certainly, the last part I want to say is that the goal of education has to be only public good. The moment a private sector has got, any private sector person has got into it, for example, I am aware of the fact that there were transporters, there were traders, you talked about politicians, there have been many retired bureaucrats who have got into it. With the primary purpose of making money out of it, they have all burnt their hands, especially in the last 5 years, when enrollment figures are just simply good. I'll take Mohan Bhai.
Yeah, Mohan Bhai, if you can unmute yourself, Mohan Bhai.
Mohan Bhai, please unmute. Mohan Bhai, please unmute. Mohan Bhai, please unmute.
Can somebody unmute him?
Can the host please unmute?
Mohan bhai, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, yes,
Mohan Bhai, yes.
yes.
Yes, Mohan Bhai.
Rajan, you said excellently well. Analyze the education system, purpose of education and all that very well. It was an excellent lecture to hear. I have a question. Basically, education is divided into two main sectors. One is technical education, which leads to material wealth, increase in material wealth, in earning and increasing material wealth. And then there is the academic side, which is spiritual side, where you learn the history, where you learn the sociology, the psychology, the history of your country, the background, the culture, and all that. Now, between these two, today we are at crossroads. We do not know which one to give more importance to, which one to give more importance, which one to going to be the very useful one, because technical education, yes, it can be on facts, it can be on experiments, it can be from laboratories that you see for yourself. Whereas the others, the academic education is on opinions. Even our own history, if you see, various interpretations, facts, whether they are correct or not, history, whether it is correct or not, all those questions are coming up. Now, therefore, you as an educationalist, where do you give more importance to? And where do you as an educationalist give a situation or explain a situation where a balance should be raised between what is technical education and between what is academic education? Because to me, all education, the purpose of all education is to conduce promotion of good. It has to conduce promotion of good. And there could be nothing better, more likable, more acceptable than making a person self-reliant. जैसे कि कहते हैं ना आत्मनिर्भर, नरेंद्र मोदी जी कहते हैं आत्मनिर्भर. I think that should be the total and only and straightforward objective of all human beings. तो उसमें वहाँ तुम्हारा कहाँ बैठता है? Where do you sit between the technical education and the academic education?
Thank you, Mohan Bhai. And you know much more than I do know more about it. You have been so much involved in the technical education, board of technical education, and also on the apprenticeship and some of those areas that we talk about it. Mohan Bhai, I'll take this question into two parts. Rather, I'll say that. In the first part, I would say that time has come when we need to go away from this kind of a silo-based education. That in the engineering college, only nothing but engineering would be taught.
That's right, yes.
Only technical education will be taught. The fact is that these engineers who are coming out, when they're working, for example, in an IT company, or they're working even on global projects, for example, whether it is in the power sector or it is in the area of construction or any of those, when they go, there are three things with which they need to contend with. One is, today, apart from the machine with which they need to understand the full part of the technology, they simply not denying about it. If they don't understand technology, they just cannot go there. If they haven't handled the machine, if they haven't really, and you know it better, if the person has not really stood on the shop floor and have handled the machine, or have handled in the conventional way, the lathe machine, for example, he just cannot do anything in that area. He can't simply guide. He can't give the directions. So that is one part. So there's simply no doubt about it. So the vocational skill, doing skill is very important. There's no denying. But equally, it is important for him to know that he is going to be, the student is, this individual is going to be dealing with people. People who are not machines, who they don't put in black and white. There's a very large gray area. And that understanding of that gray area requires an understanding of psychology, requires an understanding of the background from where the person is coming, and therefore the sociology is important. Understanding how, for example, this whole solution that he's giving, how would it fit into the overall cost structure, for example, in the case of an industrial product, how would it fit into the cost structure of the client? And therefore, that would mean understanding the economics. Also, being able to understand the different cultures in which the person is really operating. Unfortunately, and you would have seen it, Munbai, that whenever you would have interacted with many of the foreign visitors to your factory, they were perhaps as much conversant, or perhaps more conversant, about many things of India than our engineers had been. And why? Because we have never really paid any attention. So that is where understanding of India, understanding of the diversity that India has, the culture, Indian culture, and also understanding how the world is different. This whole respecting this diversity and another viewpoint is extremely important. Aaj ke time mein, when we are all working from home, there's a digital teams which are there, there's a virtual teams which are there. This has become so important for us to be able to really understand that. Therefore, one is the technical skill, the second is the people skill, and therefore the social skills that are there. And the third part, which I would say, when we are talking about, and most of the problems that you know from business, these are all complex, they cannot be put into any one area. Therefore, the interplay of other disciplines is also important. And that is why in the engineering courses, now, as an example, we are no more now talking about all 100% engineering. We are now saying 70% is engineering, 30% we are giving way for humanities and social sciences and languages to come in, so that you as an engineer, when you go out, you become more well-rounded. And this is where the IIT, or for that matter, let us say, the American education, engineering education has been different from ours. And I must realize that Mumbai, when we were going through an ABET accreditation for our engineering school, and that's where when the American team, the ABET inspectors came, they said, you are very high on the technical education, you are very high on the curriculum, very high on the school, on the classroom content, but there is no practice, there is no relationship with what is happening in the world itself. That is okay. So I cannot divide it into two different parts itself. The wall has to be.
Thank you, Rajan. Very well done. Very well done. I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm satisfied. Thank you with your answer.
Thank you.
Very well done. Yeah.
Tushar Desai has a question. I think that will be the last.
Good night, Dadaji.
Good night, Dadaji.
Hello, Dr. Rajan. I 100%
I
agree with your presentation.
you come again for
And my question is related to certain faculties and the branches and the paramedical area, because you know that the healthcare, the medical education is actually a 1 lakh crore business in this country. But the number of doctors coming out and the quality of the doctors are also a question, because of the infrastructure in the private institution. Whereas abroad, for the procedures like echocardiography, sonography, and other places, there are technologists. They are not doctors, but they are actually the technologists. So they actually offload certain work and work timing. And with this new system of what we are introducing in our country, will there be some scope of this which will actually improve in our healthcare?
There's no such kind of a direct mention in the national education policy. You will appreciate that this entire medical education is a subject matter of a very different kind of a council. And there's been though the government is talking about it, the policy is talking about a single regulatory framework, which would actually one kind of a thing is the National Commission on Higher Education or National Commission on Education that is going to be replacing CABE, for example, the CABE, the Central Advisory Board on Education, which would obviously have the Prime Minister as a chair of that the National Commission itself. The medical education has, and the law education has somehow or the other not been talked about it. They've asked these councils to really come up with it. But I'll take another shot at it, and that is in terms of the paramedical education. I quite understand. I think COVID has really made it absolutely clear that if we have to manage COVID or if we have to manage pandemic, then we need to take a fresh look at the way we are developing the doctors and the nurses and the other paramedic staff. So the nursing education will need to be changed. And that is where the first thing that they are talking about it is to do away with the nursing council itself. That is one of the biggest source of corruption. That's the biggest source of corruption. So they're talking about it from that kind of a perspective. But equally, if I were to look at some of these universities now, the so-called university, the conventional university, I don't call, let's say, the new generation universities as conventional universities. But these universities now need to come up with more and more paramedical programs, whether this is in the area of nursing, this is in the area of cardiology, this is in the area of physiotherapy. This is in any area that is needed. It's a time for us to start thinking in terms of the diploma programs and the certificate courses. So far, universities have been away from vocational education, saying that this is part of polytechnic. So therefore, ये polytechnic में होता है. या हम लोग क्या करेंगे? हम क्यों करेंगे? This is done by some dedicated college in this regard. Why should we be doing it? And the consequence of which we today have a shortage in the manpower. But time now that these universities now think about it. NMIMS, for example, I do not know whether you are aware about it or not, almost about 6 or 7 years ago, along with Nanavati Hospital, we started with the Department of Physiotherapy. We started with a Master of Physiotherapy program, which we do it with the Department of Physiotherapy. And most of our, and almost all graduates who are there from that college, from that school today, and from that program are lapped up even before the program gets completed. Because these are all field training just there. So the field training is critical in most of these cases. And you know, we in higher education have somehow or the other lived in a glass house. I would say I've lived in a glass house. I've lived on that high pedestal. मैं तो प्रोफेशनल एजुकेशन को पढ़ाता हूँ, मैं तो MBA को पढ़ाता हूँ, मैं तो यूनिवर्सिटी एजुकेटर हूँ. ये जो वोकेशनल एजुकेशन है ये नीचे का काम है. तो ये कहाँ पे करोगे? जो बागुबाई पॉलिटेक्निक में. But not realizing कि अरे बाबा वहाँ से जो बच्चे आ रहे हैं, they are perhaps the most critical. They are the drivers. That is something. So there is no such kind of a specific mention at this point.
Thank you very much. I think that was and it educated us about the education policy.
Hello?
Yeah, Thomas, you're there?
Yeah, I'm there. So I'll just switch off my video because I'm traveling right now. All right. To start with, it was a very great session. I would thank our fellow Rotarian Dr. Rajan Saxena for this great session, which was quite informative. I would take a moment out here to thank him specifically for the presentation which he had made, which was in a very logical sequence for all of us to understand in the first place that why the education change and revolution was required and in which all areas the same were required. And specifically, he has concised such a vast subject into a small PPT. I feel it is a big task to do it. So a big thank you for the same. And I hope that India changes and the education system does change. And this new system is implemented in a good and the best possible manner. Thank you.
Okay, great.
I now hand over to Gautam.
Yeah, I think it was, thank you for the vote of thanks. I now call upon Tejas for the secretary's announcement. Thanks.
I think Gautam, before that we'll have Anand Gupta on the social message.
You normally, yes, Anandji.
Social message.
Yes, sir.
Anandji.
Hello.
Yes, Anandji, go ahead.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Okay, I think I'll go ahead with the secretary announcement and then we can have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So
Please go ahead for the problem.
thanks, Gautam. And today on the Zoom meeting, we had 41 participants, so a very good number participating today. In next week's meeting, we are going to have a different format for next week. We are going to have our own members or their family members share their passion in the next meeting, and we will also be inducting 5 new members to the club next week. So a very good meeting will be there next week, and hopefully a lot of you will attend. On the 29th of September, we're going to have Prachi Shevgaonkar. She's a communicator, climate and entrepreneur, and a founder of Cool the Globe. And she has an app and a movement for climate action. So we'll be hearing her on sustainable initiatives and business craft communication strategy. Back to you, Gautam.
Yeah, just one note about this next week meeting. It's an exclusively have each one of the members or their family members talk for 5 minutes each about a topic that they are passionate about. We can have 3, 4, 5 people talk about a topic that they feel the most passionate about. It doesn't need to be related to Rotary. It could be just something they feel will make a difference, something they want us to hear about, or they need feedback from us. So it's an experiment thing. We hope to get most of you involved. It could be a 5-year-old child. It could be a 95-year-old child who wants to talk about it. So that's what Tejas was trying to say, and that's something which I had wanted to add today per se. I have also sent most of you an email. If you all can let me know your thoughts on that about the need for finance, that will also be great. And finally, Anandji, if you're ready for your social message.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just I want to give a social. See, after hearing Dr. Rajan Saxena about new education policy of India, I really felt that let us add it to make the let us create a awareness. My message is let us create a awareness about the central government's interest subsidy scheme for education loan for higher studies. That is after 12th, taken are eligible for the subsidy in the interest from the government of India. All the national bank have been directed that this education loan compulsorily to be given to each and every person without any guarantee up to 7.5 lakh rupees. All the people who are having a family income up to 4.5 lakh rupees are fully eligible for this. I'm sure that the way Dr. Rajan Saxena pointed out, that 50%, 57% of the students do not cross the 10th in this country. They will, if they make aware of this the education policy of Government of India, that there is a interest subsidy available, then they will all be. And this is to be repaid only after they get a job, and there is a moratorium period of full education period, 1 more year, and went to that respective bank. So this is a social message. If we can create, we will be helping to the large population and a great life. Greatly. Thank you.
Gautam, you forgot to mention about eye cornea collection. During your year, up till now, we have collected 20 eyes. So 20 into 20 means 40 eyes. Gautam, we can't hear you.
So I think that was that. Okay. Now can you hear?
No.
Okay. Okay, I think
Now
there is
say.
some issue with the connection.
Yeah. Now say.
I think it is fantastic work being done. It is part of our, of course, organ donation initiative, and the eye center is going great guns thanks to the effort of everybody. You know, the medical committee, Samapti Ben, Rahul Bhai, Jen Bhai, everybody who's associated with it. And I hope it goes from strength to more strength. I will almost say. So,
Even Uttam, you should
yes,
give credit to Uttam.
yes.
Mr. Uttam.
So with that, I declare the meeting closed and open the floor for chit